Oi Caveboy Chapter 7. In Chapter 6, Iggy and Hubba, hunting for the stankwort, came across a no-neck. And between them they managed to work out that the no-neck's name was Crack, and that Crack seemed to understand that they were looking for the plant and seemed to know where to find some. Chapter 7. Scent of the stankwort. 10 minutes later they were standing at the edge of a bubbling brown bog, where islands of marshweed poked their heads above the slime. Iggy clasped a hand over his mouth. Once, when he was little, he'd stepped in a pile of mammoth dung, and the smell had clung to him for days, but this was worse, much worse. It was like dead fish rotting in the sun. It seemed to be coming from a small patch of purple on one of the islands. Iggy's hopes rose. That had to be the stankwort. "Look!" he said, pointing. "But how do we get to it?" He turned and found to his surprise that he was dressing thin air. Hubba and Crack had disappeared. A minute ago they were all standing together, but now the other two had vanished without a word. Iggy guessed Hubba must have retreated to a safe distance where he could be sick. He covered his mouth with his furs, trying not to think too much about dying alone in a bog. They'd come all this way to find purple stankwort, and he wasn't going to be put off by a bit of stink. He waded out into the bubbling bog, and in no time had sunk up to his knees. This wasn't a good sign. Something slipped through the slime, leaving a trail of ripples in its wake. A shudder passed through Iggy. Were there such things as bog snakes, and if so, how big were they? The mud oozed and slopped as he waded deeper, keeping his eyes on a small patch of purple. A little further and he'd be able to reach it. But his next step missed the bottom, and warm mud rose up to his neck, slopping into his mouth. He was sinking deeper. "Hubba!" he cried. "Help!" His muffled cry died away in the silence. Iggy closed his eyes. Great, he thought. So this is where it ends. Sinking in the world's smelliest bog. He thought of all the questions he would never be able to answer. Like why you get fur in your belly button, and why it never rains upwards. The stankwort was so close to his fingertips he could almost touch it. He stretched out a hand, leaning forward and tasting another mouthful of slime. His fingers grazed the flower's stems, and then he felt it, something cold slithering over his foot. It was starting to coil itself around his leg. Ah! Iggy took off as if his bottom was on fire. The next thing he knew, he was lying on the bank, coated in sticky brown slime. There was a disgusting smell in his nostrils. He looked down to find he was clutching a plant with a flower like a purple teardrop. The stankwort. He almost wanted to weep with relief. Now all he had to do was find Hubba and they could finally go home. Everything was going to be okay. The chief would get better, and the black cloud hanging over him would be lifted. He stood up, dripping globs of mud. "Hubba, where are you?" Slopping through the fog, Iggy tried to remember which direction they had come from. "Hubba! Iggy! Iggy!" The voice was a way off and somewhere to his left. Iggy tucked the stankwort inside his furs for safekeeping and broke into a run. He ducked under some trees and came to the clearing where they'd sat by the fire. Hubba was there. So was Crack, although he didn't look quite as friendly. Maybe it was his wolfish smile, or the large army standing beside him. Like Crack, the other no-necks were heavily built with short legs flat noses and lumpy faces. They wore strings of bones, and one of them was sporting an animal skull as a hat. They were armed with wicked-looking spears, which right now were pointing at Iggy's head. "Sorry, Iggy," sighed Hubba. "I did try to warn you." "Oh, and when was that?" "When I shouted 'Iggy, Iggy,' I said it twice, see, which were a code for 'I'm took prisoner, run!'" "Thanks," said Iggy. "Obviously I should have guessed that." Crack stepped forward. He no longer looked like someone who would share his last fish with you. He smiled his twisted smile. "So, we're meet again, Irk boy." Iggy stared in disbelief. "You speak Irkish?" "Not really," muttered Hubba. "His accent's terrible." "Yes," said Crack, puffing out his chest. "As a matter of frogs, I speak many talks. Irkish, Vargish, Ticklish. Maybe you not believe? Maybe you think Crack is big stupids?" "No," protested Iggy. "Yes, you Irks always think you are big clevers. Plenty big caves, plenty big hunters." I wouldn't say that," said Iggy. He tried to remember what he had talked about over supper. Obviously he should have been more careful, but he'd assumed Crack was too simple to understand. "If anyone a big stupid," he thought, "it's me. Dad tried to warn me about no-necks, but I thought I knew better." Crack was shouting something in his own harsh language. He seemed to be the leader, because his men scuttled off quickly to obey. They were getting ready to move off. "So," said Crack, "what way? You show Crack." "Show you?" said Iggy. Where are we going?" Crack pushed his face so close that Iggy could smell his fishy breath. "Valley of Irks," he leered.